On Halloween 2010, as children dressed in costumes knocked on doors across Ascot, Berkshire, a different kind of horror was unfolding inside a home on Millionaire's Row. 46-year-old Joanna Simpson was murdered by the man she had once loved, bludgeoned to death with a claw hammer whilst her 2 young children played just 2 doors away. Her body would be found 5 days later, buried in a pre-dug grave in Windsor Great Park. The man responsible was a British Airways captain, a pilot trusted with hundreds of lives. But despite overwhelming evidence of premeditation, Robert Brown would never be convicted of murder. Joanna Simpson was born in 1964 in York, Yorkshire, into a close, loving family. Her father, Chris, owned a successful building firm, and her mother, Diana, would later describe their daughter as someone special. When Joanna was young, the family moved to the Isle of Man, where she attended the Buchan School. She was described as a livewire, adventurous, and someone who threw herself into everything. After school, Joanna went to the University of Bath, where she completed a business degree. She had a successful career before focusing on what would become her greatest joy, being a mother. Her best friend, Hetty Barkworth Nanton, said Jo was a ray of sunshine. She was kind, warm, fun, and above all, an incredible mother. They were soulmates. No matter how bad things were, Joanna would always dig deep and make the best of things. Joanna had strong moral values. She believed all children should have a safe, secure, and loving environment. She didn't miss a birthday for anyone. One friend said, "Throughout my life, she's taught me a lot about kindness." Before she met Robert Brown, Joanna had been married once before. That marriage ended amicably. She purchased a house in Ascot during that time. It was a wreck when she bought it, with trees growing through the ceiling, but Joanna renovated it herself, transforming it into a beautiful home. Everything changed in November 1998, when Joanna met Robert Brown in South Africa. Brown was 36 years old, and Joanna was 34, making him 2 years older than Joanna. He was a British Airways pilot, flying long-haul routes to San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Hong Kong. He captained Boeing 747s. He was confident, persuasive, and had an air of authority that came with the job. The romance was described as a whirlwind. Robert Brown moved into Joanna's home in Ascot, the house she had purchased with her first husband and renovated herself. On Christmas Day 1998, whilst piloting a plane to Hong Kong as part of a Christmas flight he was working, Robert proposed to Joanna. It was romantic, grand, dramatic. She said yes. On the 13th of February 1999, they married in a small ceremony in Ascot. But from the very beginning, there were warning signs that those close to Joanna couldn't ignore. When Joanna introduced Robert to her parents on the Isle of Man, their reaction was immediate and negative. Diana and Chris disliked Robert from the start. They described him as rude and arrogant. He was quite reserved, they said, but also dismissive of Joanna's friends. People noticed that Joanna seemed more relaxed when Robert wasn't around. When he was there, something changed in her demeanour. Joanna's father was so concerned about this marriage that he insisted they sign a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. The prenup was designed to protect Joanna's assets and her trust fund from Robert. It stated that the home, Tun Cottage on Buckhurst Road in Ascot, was solely in Joanna's possession. Robert wasn't happy about signing it. He felt it was unfair. But he signed it anyway. Then came the honeymoon. Joanna and Robert flew to Cape Town for what should have been a romantic, blissful start to their marriage. Instead, from Cape Town, Joanna called her mother. She said marrying Robert Brown was a terrible mistake. Diana was alarmed, but what could be done? The marriage had just begun. By April 1999, just 2 months after the wedding, Joanna discovered she was pregnant. She felt trapped. There was no easy way out now. In December 1999, 10 months after the wedding, their son Alex was born. 17 months later, In May 2001, their daughter Katie arrived. The family then settled into their home in Ascot, chosen specifically to be near Heathrow Airport for Robert's job. Joanna adored her children. Everything she did was for them. She had given up her career to become what she called a totally hands-on mother. She ran a successful 5-star bed and breakfast business at Toon Cottage, which gave her the flexibility to focus on raising Alex and Katie. The business was thriving. It allowed her to be there for every school run, every bedtime, every moment. But Robert had invested £200,000 into the business, and this would later become a major, bitter point of contention in their divorce. The marriage was crumbling. Robert rarely spent time with Joanna and the children after returning from his long-haul flights. He would get into work early and leave late, determined to advance his career. Some of Joanna's friends said Robert was more of an absent father, leaving Joanna to do a significant amount of the parenting on her own. There was a pattern emerging: coercive control, isolation, intimidation. Joanna was a private person who didn't talk openly about her marital problems, but those close to her could sense the issues. Diana, her mother, had been worried that Joanna would be lonely living in Ascot because Robert was away from home so much with work. But Joanna seemed determined to make the best of it. She always did. By January 2007, 8 years into the marriage, Joanna had had enough. She consulted a solicitor about the marriage after Robert accused her of having an affair. The accusation was baseless, but it was the beginning of the end. What happened next would reveal just how dangerous Robert Brown really was. In February 2007, whilst on a work trip in Hong Kong, Robert telephoned Joanna. He told her he was having really dark thoughts, such as thinking about killing her and their children with an axe and about committing suicide by crashing a plane. In the end, she hung up the phone, feeling very distressed. She said, "I don't know why he's doing this." But then she realized he was saying these things to put more pressure on her to keep everything together. Joanna was terrified, but she didn't report it to the police. Then came the knife incident. It was July or August 2007, and it would be the most serious attack before the murder itself. Joanna arrived home around 10 o'clock in the evening with Alex and Katie. Robert put the children to bed. During that time, 6-year-old Katie mentioned to her father that they had spent time that day with a man Robert suspected was Joanna's lover. Robert's jealousy and rage ignited. He confronted Joanna in the kitchen of Toon Cottage. Without warning, he placed an arm around her neck and held a knife against her chest. She stayed calm, used her words carefully, and convinced him to lower the knife. Then she told him the truth. She could no longer be with him. Robert's response was cold and controlling. He said she could leave, but that she could not take the children. It was a threat designed to keep her trapped. Then he added another threat. If she told anyone what had happened, it would be the worst for her. Joanna understood what that meant. Despite this horrific attack, Joanna didn't report it to the police. The fear was too great. She was terrified of what Robert might do if she involved the authorities. But she did tell him he had to move out of the house. Robert left, moving to a property in North Street, Winkfield, Berkshire. But he continued to have access to the children, and the nightmare was far from over. And so began a bitter, acrimonious divorce that would last 3.5 years. The prenuptial agreement became the focal point. Robert felt he was stitched up by it. He believed he was being deprived of money he was owed. He had put £200,000 into Joanna's bed and breakfast business, and now, because of the prenup, he wasn't going to see the return he believed he deserved. During the divorce proceedings, disturbing details emerged. The CCTV system that Joanna had fitted at the house stopped working because the cables had been cut. The security lights stopped working because those cables had been cut too. As part of the divorce proceedings, Robert supplied a list of credit card transactions that revealed he had purchased spy equipment. When Joanna's solicitors asked what this was for, Robert admitted he'd bought a tracking device to put on Joanna's car. He had been monitoring her movements. For 3 years, their divorce dragged on. It was ostensibly over the family home, the house that Joanna had bought as a wreck, with trees growing through the ceiling, and renovated 4 years before meeting Brown. She had poured her heart into that house. It was hers, but Robert wanted his share. Joanna had given Robert an undertaking to stay away from the house for 6 months, which was then extended by another 6 months. But the control, the surveillance, the intimidation continued in other ways. Hetty Barkworth-Nanton would later say, "I spoke to Jo an hour before she was killed, and she was really down." The stress of the divorce, the fear of Robert, and the uncertainty about the future were taking their toll. But Joanna kept going. She always did. She was driven. She was resilient. And she believed that soon she would finally be free. Then, on the 20th of October 2010, something happened that would seal Joanna's fate. Just 11 days before she was murdered, the UK Supreme Court handed down a landmark ruling in the case of Radmacher Fiogranatino. A German heiress worth approximately £100 million had won her legal battle against her French ex-husband. He had sought to invalidate their prenuptial agreement, initially being awarded almost £6 million. But she appealed. On the 20th of October 2010, the Supreme Court ruled 8-1 in her favour. The court held that prenuptial agreements should be given decisive weight in divorces. It was the first time prenuptial agreements were made enforceable in UK law. For Robert Brown, this ruling was absolutely devastating. His entire divorce strategy had been focused on invalidating the prenuptial agreement he had signed with Joanna. He had been arguing for 3.5 years that the prenup was unfair, that it deprived him of money he was owed. And now, the UK's highest court had just ruled that prenups must be upheld. His case had collapsed. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for the 8th of November 2010 at the High Court, just 1 week away. 1 week until Joanna would be legally free of Robert Brown, with her assets protected, her home secured, and her children safe. Joanna contacted her stepbrother and her friend Hetty. She was excited about the precedent set by the Radmacher ruling. She believed this was it. She was finally going to be free. She could raise her children without fear. The nightmare was almost over. But Robert Brown had other plans. Plans that had been months in the making. Plans that involved a grave, a hammer, and a plastic storage box. It was Sunday, the 31st of October 2010. Halloween. Children across Ascot were preparing their costumes, excited for an evening of trick-or-treating. For Joanna Simpson, it was meant to be an ordinary day. Robert Brown had the children for a half-term visit, and he was due to return them in the afternoon. At around 4 p.m, Robert arrived at Tun Cottage on Buckhurst Road in Ascot with Alex and Katie. The children, aged 10 and 9, were excited to see their mum. They ran inside to the playroom, ready to play and tell her about their time with their father. Robert followed Joanna into the house. He carried with him one of the children's homework bags. Hidden inside that homework bag was a claw hammer. He had taken it from his bike shed earlier and concealed it carefully. But the hammer wasn't the only evidence of premeditation. Months before this day, Robert Brown had dug a grave in Windsor Great Park. He had purchased a plastic storage box, large enough to use as a makeshift coffin. He had bought bin liners, tape, and other materials. Everything was ready. Joanna and Robert began to argue. The exact words they exchanged may never be fully known, but Robert would later claim it was about medication, a flimsy excuse that the judge would dismiss. The children were in the playroom, just 2 doors away from the bedroom where the argument was taking place. They were playing, unaware that their lives were about to be shattered forever. Then Robert struck her. He hit Joanna with the claw hammer. Again, and again, and again. 14 times in total. Each blow was delivered with brutal force. Joanna had defensive wounds on her arms and hands. She had tried to fight him off. She had tried to protect herself, but Robert was 6 feet 5 inches tall, physically stronger and armed with a weapon. She didn't stand a chance. As she lay there, dying, her 9-year-old daughter Katie heard the sounds from the playroom. Katie didn't know what the sounds were, but she knew something was wrong. When Robert emerged from the bedroom, Katie asked him a question that would later be used as damning evidence in court. She asked her father if he was going to call an ambulance. He never did. The judge would later state unequivocally that Robert Brown never had any intention of calling an ambulance. Robert wrapped Joanna's body in plastic sheeting. He placed it in the boot of his car. And Katie saw him do it. She saw her father put her mother's body into the car. He told Alex and Katie that their mum was unwell and had to go to hospital. The children believed him. What choice did they have? Just 20 minutes after the murder, at around 4:20 p.m, Robert returned to his home in North Street, Winkfield, with Alex and Katie. Joanna's body was still in the boot. The children were taken inside, confused, worried, but trusting their father. Then Robert drove to Windsor Great Park, to the grave he had dug months earlier. He buried Joanna in the pre-dug grave, inside the makeshift coffin. He covered her with earth. He hid a spade nearby that he had used. He disposed of the CCTV unit from the house and the hammer, burying those items separately in the park. That evening, Robert dropped Alex and Katie off with his girlfriend Stephanie, overnight. He told her nothing about what he had done. But Stephanie sensed something was wrong. Robert seemed off, distracted, perhaps even flushed. She became worried and contacted Robert's parents in Scotland. Robert's brother Kenneth also contacted him to check on things. But Robert said nothing about what he had done. The Halloween night wore on. Children knocked on doors, collecting sweets, laughing, celebrating, and nobody knew where Joanna Simpson was. At around 5 o'clock in the morning on Monday, the 1st of November, Robert was next seen by his girlfriend Stephanie after returning home from burying Joanna's body. He appeared calm, collected, as though nothing had happened. But Stephanie's concerns from the previous evening had not gone away. She had contacted Robert's family, and they too were worried. At 7:54 a.m, Kenneth, Robert's brother, contacted the police. He said he was worried about Joanna. Something wasn't right. He couldn't get in touch with her, and Robert's behaviour had been strange. At 8:38 a.m, Robert himself called the police. In a calculated move designed to appear cooperative, he reported a domestic incident with Joanna.
Hello, Thames Valley Police, Cal speaking.
Yeah, hello. I'd like to make an appointment to come in regarding an incident, a domestic issue.
Is it your girlfriend?
My ex-wife.
Right, and you're both okay, are you? None of you are harmed at all, are you?
Well, one person is.
Okay, is that person seeking any medical attention? Do you know? Do they need it?
No.
He requested an appointment to discuss a serious domestic incident. He was calm on the call, measured, giving nothing away. But the call raised immediate concerns about Joanna's welfare. Officers were dispatched to Tun Cottage straight away. At 9 a.m, police officers arrived at the house in Ascot. They knocked on the door. No answer. They called out. Silence. They forced entry into the property. What they found inside was horrifying. There were spots of blood in and around the property. Blood in the bedroom. Blood on the walls. Blood on the ceiling. Blood in the kitchen. The forensic officers would later describe the scene as one of the most brutal they had ever encountered. But Joanna was not there. Her body was gone. Her phone, purse and car were there. But Joanna Simpson had vanished. At 10:11 a.m, Robert Brown attended Maidenhead Police Station voluntarily. The moment he walked through the door, he was arrested on suspicion of murder. The police assumed that because Robert had handed himself in, because he had made the call, he would disclose what had happened and where Joanna was. They believed he would cooperate, perhaps even show remorse, but they were wrong. Robert Brown was not there to help. He was there to control the narrative for as long as possible. He was taken into an interview room. Over the following days, he was interviewed approximately 9 times. In each interview, he repeatedly said no comment. He refused to answer questions. He refused to help with the missing persons investigation.
Robert, tell us everything you know about the whereabouts of Joanna.
No comment.
But you've continued to want to speak to police and to come to the police station. Is that correct?
No comment.
Instead, when he did speak, he portrayed himself as the victim in an acrimonious divorce. He cited the prenuptial agreement as the reason for everything, painting Joanna as controlling, wealthy, and vindictive. The interviewers saw through it immediately. They saw the prenup as a possible motive for murder, not a defence. Days passed. Extensive searches were conducted across the local area. Police officers, K9 units, and helicopters scoured the surroundings. Volunteers from the community joined in, but there was no sign of Joanna. Her family was beside themselves. Her mother, Diana Parks, was desperate, frantic, terrified. Where was her daughter? Was she still alive? What had Robert done? Robert refused to help. He wouldn't tell the police where Joanna's body was. He sat in his cell, silent, calculating, waiting. Then, on the 3rd of November, at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, something changed. Police showed Robert photographs of the blood within Joanna's address. The evidence was overwhelming. Following a discussion with his solicitor, Robert finally made a statement. He gave a 1-page statement. In it, he said he had lost control. He said he was involved in an argument with Joanna. He claimed he had pushed her. He admitted he put her in the boot of his car, claiming he intended to take her to hospital. He confessed he took his children to his home address in Winkfield. And finally, he told them he had concealed and disposed of Joanna's body in Windsor Great Park. On Thursday, the 4th of November, officers returned to Windsor Great Park to find the exact site. Robert was taken to the scene, accompanied by police. The moment they arrived, he immediately pointed out where he had buried his wife. There was no hesitation, no searching. The next day, Friday the 5th of November, forensic teams began the painstaking work of recovering the body. The grave was shallow, located about 40 feet from Sand Hill Road in a drainage culvert area. Joanna had been buried there for 5 days. Robert Brown was formally charged with murder. The post-mortem findings confirmed what everyone feared. The cause of death was blunt force trauma and strangulation. On the 11th of May 2011, Robert Brown's trial began at Reading Crown Court. Joanna's family and friends filled the courtroom, expecting justice. More than 20 had come forward as witnesses to speak for Joanna. They thought there was no way he'd get away with it. But Robert Brown pleaded not guilty to murder. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. His defense claimed he was suffering from an adjustment disorder at the time he killed Joanna, a mild condition that rarely led to violence. The judge would later note that the condition disappeared shortly after Robert killed his wife. Robert gave evidence. He described Joanna as a scheming, rich brat. He said he'd been driven to kill her by years of recriminations. He admitted concealing the hammer in his daughter's homework bag, but provided no explanation why. When asked about the attack, he claimed he could not remember what happened. The prosecution presented clear evidence of premeditation. The grave dug months in advance. The hammer concealed in the children's bag. The plastic coffin ready. 14 blows with intent to kill. No ambulance called despite his daughter asking. Extensive steps to cover his tracks. One piece of evidence was never shown to the jury. Katie's statement to police. "They got into a fight," she said. Dad put Mum in the car and said he had hurt her. He said he was taking Mum to the hospital. Katie had heard the bang. She had seen her father put her mother in the car. Diana would later say that had that clip been shown, it would have been a different verdict. On the 24th of May 2011, after nearly 15 hours of deliberation, the verdict came. Not guilty of murder, guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. 26 years imprisonment. Under UK law, he would be eligible for automatic release after serving half. 13 years, November 2023. There were tears and gasps of astonishment. Diana Parks gave a statement on the court steps. There has been a gross miscarriage of justice. Robert Brown got away with murder in name only. In 2014, Diana Parks and Hetty Barkworth Nanton co-founded the Joanna Simpson Foundation. Then, in 2016, Diana met Queen Camilla at a Safe Lives event. Diana shared Joanna's story. Camilla's reaction was to cry. She told Diana, "I'm going to do something." That meeting became engraved on Camilla's heart and the turning point for her domestic abuse work. But as 2023 approached, Robert Brown was due for automatic release. The campaign began. Diana, Hetty, politicians, and Queen Camilla fought to block it. Alex and Katie made statements. Katie's words, written at age 9, were devastating. "My father killed my mummy and I'm scared. He is the most evilest man I have ever known." On 10th October 2023, Justice Secretary Alex Chalk blocked Brown's release. In February 2024, Brown's High Court challenge was dismissed. As of October 2025, he remains in prison pending a parole board decision. In December 2024, the UK government announced new sentencing reforms, directly crediting the Joanna Simpson Foundation. The foundation continues providing specialised support for children affected by domestic abuse. Joanna's legacy lives on through systemic change. Joanna Simpson was 46 years old, full of kindness and love for her children. Then, in a single night, all of that was stolen. But what followed was powerful. A mother who refused to give up. A queen moved to tears. A country waking up to domestic violence. When we remember Joanna Simpson, it shouldn't be for the cruelty of what happened, but for the light she carried and the change that light inspired.